Kate Rivers was a woman who believed in second chances and small mercies. At 23, her life was a carefully constructed balance between grease-stained aprons and hidden recorders, between serving pie and chasing the truth. She worked the graveyard shift at Rosie's roadside diner, a flickering neon oasis on the edge of the warehouse district, while building her portfolio as an aspiring investigative journalist. Her articles on local corruption had been rejected by every major publication in the city, but she kept writing, kept digging, kept believing that one day the right story would change everything. But on a humid Tuesday night, she found something that would change everything in ways she never imagined. It was a set of keys, heavy gold things attached to a thick keychain with intricate engravings she couldn't quite decipher. They'd been left at booth 12, the corner seat where the security camera had the worst angle, a blind spot she'd noticed months ago while reviewing footage for a piece on workplace safety. The keys gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, 3 of them attached to encrypted fobs that pulsed with a faint red glow. The weight was substantial, intentional, the kind of object designed to announce its importance. What Kate didn't know as she slipped them into her apron pocket was that across the street, behind the tinted windows of a black SUV, Siwoo Park was watching her every move through a scope, his finger resting gently on a trigger, waiting to see what kind of person she really was. This wasn't a mistake. This was a test, and her life depended on passing it. Kate Rivers was the kind of person who noticed details others missed. Her natural hair was pulled back in a practical bun that somehow still managed to frame her face beautifully, and her dark eyes held a sharpness that made people uncomfortable when they had something to hide. She'd grown up in the West Side projects, raised by a grandmother who cleaned offices and a mother who worked double shifts at the hospital. She knew the value of hard work and the cost of shortcuts. At Rosie's, she was dependable, the one who always showed up, who remembered regulars' orders, who defused drunk customers with a smile and a firm hand. But beneath the professional exterior, she was always watching, always recording mental notes about the city's underbelly that revealed itself in the small hours when people thought no one important was paying attention. It was 2:17 a.m. when she began her final rounds, wiping down tables and collecting forgotten items for the lost and found box under the register. The diner was empty except for old Hector nursing his 3rd cup of coffee at the counter, his trembling hands wrapped around the chipped mug like it was a lifeline. Booth 12 had been occupied by a man she'd never seen before, though his presence had been impossible to ignore. He'd arrived at midnight, moved with the kind of controlled precision that suggested military training or something darker, and ordered nothing but sparkling water with a specific temperature request. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, and his face was all sharp angles and unreadable expressions. He'd sat facing the door, his back never touching the worn vinyl, his eyes constantly scanning the room with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He'd left 20 minutes ago, departing as silently as he'd arrived, and now Kate stood at his table, staring at what he'd left behind. The keys caught the light in a way that seemed almost deliberate, golden and heavy and humming with unspoken significance. She picked them up carefully, feeling their substantial weight, noting the unusual fobs with their encrypted displays and biometric sensors. This was no ordinary set of keys. These were access points to something important, something dangerous, something that didn't belong in a roadside diner frequented by truckers and insomniacs. The engravings on the keychain showed symbols she recognized from her research into organized crime, markings associated with the ghost of Seoul, a name whispered in the city's shadows with equal parts fear and respect. Before she could process the implications, she noticed something else. A small business card, crisp and black with raised silver lettering, had been tucked partially under the napkin dispenser. It bore a single name, Siwoo Park, and an address in the financial district that made her breath catch. This was the man the police couldn't touch, the one her sources spoke about in hushed tones, the architect of the city's invisible empire. A wave of understanding washed over her, cold and clarifying. This wasn't an accident. The employee bathroom of the Moonlight Diner was a cramped, neon-flickering sanctuary that smelled of industrial bleach and desperation. Kate Rivers stood over the chipped porcelain sink, her breath hitching as she stared at the items spread before her. The keys she had found under table 4, Siwoo Park's table, reflected the harsh fluorescent light like a promise and a threat. As a journalist working a double shift to keep her head above water, Kate's instincts were a dual-edged sword. Her eyes cataloged the hardware. 2 encrypted fobs with shifting alphanumeric sequences, military-grade security, and a solid gold keychain engraved with a haunting blend of Korean script and occult-like symbols. The gold alone was worth at least $5,000 in raw weight, a sum that could cover her mother's medication for 6 months. Her phone buzzed against the porcelain. She looked at the contact list. She had 3 paths, each a different version of her future. She could call the number on the black embossed card left with the keys, the honest route. She could go to the police, though in a city where the ghost of Soul was rumored to have half the precinct on his payroll, that felt like a death sentence. Or she could call Marcus. Marcus, a former source from the East Side crew, would pay $50,000 for these fobs. He wouldn't ask why she had them. He'd just want the data they guarded. $50,000. The number was a rhythmic chant in her skull. It was her grandmother's mortgage arrears. It was the end of the 18% interest rate on her student loans. It was a one-way ticket out of the cycle of poverty that had claimed 3 generations of Rivers women. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the poverty rate in 2024 hovered around 11.1%, but in her neighborhood, it felt like 100%. She was tired of being a statistic. Her thumb hovered over Marcus's name. In the cracked mirror, she saw a woman she barely recognized, eyes shadowed by exhaustion, skin sallow under the buzzing light. She thought of her grandmother, a woman who had spent 40 years scrubbing floors only to face foreclosure. Character is what you do when nobody's watching, the old woman always said. Kate's finger trembled, then pulled away. She couldn't do it. If she sold the keys, she wasn't just a thief. She was a participant in the very system of corruption she spent her nights writing about in her unpublished blog. She gathered the cold metal into her palm. She would return them. What she didn't know was that across the street, inside a black SUV with tinted windows, Siwoo Park was watching the diner's exit. He lowered a silenced pistol and allowed a ghost of a smile to touch his lips. She had passed the first test. At 5 a.m., Kate stood in the biting pre-dawn air and dialed the number. It was picked up on the first ring. "You found something of mine?" a voice said, low, melodic, and terrifyingly calm. "I have your keys," Kate whispered. "I want to return them." The address on the card. "Tonight at 10. Come alone." The address led Kate to the financial district, specifically to a monolith of black glass and steel known as Obsidian. It was a club that didn't exist on Google Maps. It was a place for the top 0.1%, a demographic that, according to recent economic data, holds roughly 30% of the nation's wealth. In this building, that wealth was translated into raw power. Kate wore her only professional dress, a black sheath from her grandmother's funeral. When she stepped inside, the air changed. It was filtered, expensive, and carried the faint scent of sandalwood and ozone. A man in a tailored suit intercepted her. "Miss Rivers. He is expecting you." She was led past velvet-shrouded alcoves to a private office on the top floor. Siwoo Park stood by the window, the city lights of the harbor sprawling behind him like a carpet of diamonds. When he turned, Kate felt a physical jolt. He was younger than the tabloids suggested, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes that seemed to record her heart rate. "You have the envelope?" he asked. Kate handed it over. Her hand brushed his, and a spark of static electricity jumped between them. He didn't flinch. He opened the envelope, verified the fobs, and set them on a desk made of single-slab obsidian. "Why didn't you sell them?" he asked, stepping into her personal space. "The East Side crew would have made you a very wealthy woman." "They aren't mine to sell," Kate replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "A rare sentiment," Siwoo mused. "In a city where 70% of crimes are property-related, your honesty is statistically improbable. You know who I am, Kate. You know what I do. I know the rumors. And yet you came." Bravery and stupidity often look the same from a distance. He leaned in closer, his dark eyes searching hers. "You've saved me a great deal of logistical friction. Some would say you've earned a reward." "I don't want your money," Kate said. "I wasn't going to offer you money, Miss Rivers. I'm offering you something much more dangerous, the truth." Siwoo sat behind his desk, gesturing for Kate to take the leather chair opposite him. "You're a journalist. You want to expose the ghost of Soul. You want to show the world how the shadows move." Kate felt a chill. He had done his homework. "I want to write the truth." "Then take it." He slid a matte black card across the desk. "This is a permanent pass to Obsidian. Use it. Sit at the tables. Listen to the conversations. Watch how the city really breathes." It was a masterful trap. He was offering her the big break, the career-making story, but at the cost of her independence. By accepting the card, she was becoming a guest of the ghost. She was becoming a part of his world. As she reached for the card, her phone buzzed in her purse. A text from a blocked number. "Leave now. Not safe." Kate didn't react. She tucked the card into her bag and stood up. "Thank you for the opportunity. My driver will take you home," Siwoo said. It wasn't a suggestion. The ride back to the projects was silent. Kate watched the luxury high-rises give way to boarded-up storefronts. She felt like she was carrying a radioactive isotope in her purse. Over the next few days the paranoia set in. She noticed the same silver sedan parked near the diner. She felt eyes on her back while she served coffee. On the fourth night, driven by a mixture of journalistic hunger and a need to face her fear, she returned to Obsidian. She sat at a corner table, sipping sparkling water she couldn't afford. She saw a city councilman shaking hands with a known cartel lieutenant. She saw a tech mogul handing over a thumb drive to a foreign attaché. It was all there, the rot of the world laid out like a buffet. But when she left at midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The street was too empty. 3 men, not in Siwoo's polished suits but in heavy tactical jackets, stepped out from the shadows of an alleyway. They weren't his men. They were the competition. The girl with the black card, one of them rasped. Kate didn't wait. She bolted. Her heels clicked frantically against the pavement as she sprinted toward the main thoroughfare. Her heart was a frantic bird against her ribs. She ducked into a narrow service alley, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She reached the street just as a yellow cab rounded the corner. She dove inside, screaming for the driver to go. As the car sped away, she looked back. The 3 men weren't chasing her anymore. They were just standing there, one of them holding up a camera, snapping her photo. They didn't want to catch her. They wanted to mark her. By returning those keys, Kate hadn't just saved her integrity. She had painted a target on her back that was visible to every shark in the city. She was no longer just a witness to the story, she was the center of it. Kate did not sleep. The adrenaline of the previous night at Obsidian lingered like a bitter aftertaste. She sat at her kitchen table, the blue light of her laptop illuminating a face etched with exhaustion and resolve. For years, she had been an outsider looking in, a freelance journalist struggling to make sense of the city's shadows. Now the shadows were staring back. She cross-referenced the faces she had seen at the club with her extensive digital archives on the Korean underworld. The 3 men who had followed her remained enigmas, but their behavior, bold, uncoordinated with the club's security and predatory, suggested they were independent scouts or rival faction members. She realized with a sinking feeling that she wasn't just a witness anymore. She was a variable in a high-stakes calculation. Over the next 2 weeks, Kate lived a double life. By day, she served coffee at the diner, her hands steady despite the frantic racing of her mind. By night, she returned to Obsidian. Siwoo had granted her a terrifying kind of freedom. The investigative eye was allowed to watch. She documented every detail, the frequency of police cruisers idling near the entrance, the specific handshakes between distributors, and the hidden power dynamics of the VIP lounge. The club was a masterclass in organized crime. She learned that Siwoo's organization operated with a corporate efficiency that would shame most Fortune 500 companies. However, the tension was palpable. The underworld was a volatile ecosystem. In a city where the poverty rate in marginalized neighborhoods hovered around 28%, the lure of a rival's higher payout was a constant threat to loyalty. On the 16th night, the routine shattered. Siwoo entered with his inner circle, including his second-in-command, Chen Wei. Chen was a man of steel and silence, a former military operative with a reputation for absolute lethality. As they settled into a private booth to review documents, Kate observed from a distance, her hidden recorder active. Then she saw it, a signal. Chen Wei's fingers tapped a rhythmic code against the mahogany table. 3 sharp strikes followed by a deliberate adjustment of his watch. Kate's breath hitched. In her research on the Huang family, Siwoo's primary rivals, that specific gesture was a confirmation code. It meant, target in sight. Ready to move. The betrayal was staggering. If the second-in-command was a mole, Siwoo was already a dead man walking. Kate knew she couldn't approach the table without being intercepted by Chen. She had to be calculated. She stood up, feigning dizziness, and stumbled toward the booth. She tripped near Siwoo, her hand brushing his arm. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her eyes wide with a genuine terror that served her acting well. "I'm not feeling well. Can we speak? Privately?" Siwoo's gaze was like a thermal scan, searching for deception. He saw only urgency. "Chen, continue," he commanded, leading Kate to a soundproofed side room. The moment the door clicked shut, Kate hissed, "Chen Wei is the mole." He gave the Huang confirmation signal. Twice. Siwoo didn't flinch, but the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You are sure?" "I've spent 2 years coding these patterns for a story that was never published," Kate said, her voice trembling. "He's signaling that you are vulnerable." He's setting an ambush for tonight. Siwoo studied with her. He knew the statistics of his world. Betrayal was the leading cause of executive turnover in the syndicates. He also knew that Kate, a woman with everything to lose, had no reason to lie. You think tactically, Siwoo noted, a dark spark of appreciation in his eyes. Tonight I was to oversee a shipment at the harbor. If I don't go, I look weak. If I go, I die. Then change the game, Kate countered. Send a decoy. Redirect the shipment. But do it before he realizes the signal was spotted. Siwoo leaned in close. You've crossed the line, Miss Rivers. There is no going back to the diner after this. 20 minutes later, a text arrived from an unknown number. North exit. Now. Kate slipped out the back of the club into a rain-slicked alley. Siwoo was there, his silhouette sharp against the city lights. You were right, he said, his voice a low growl. Chin just coordinated with the Huangs. They're waiting at the harbor. Then we stay away, Kate said. No, Siwoo replied, ushering her into a black sedan. We eliminate the threat. And you're coming with us. I need someone who knows the forgotten city. Kate realized with a jolt that her childhood spent navigating the industrial labyrinths of the South Side was now a military asset. As they sped toward the harbor, Siwoo barked orders in Korean over an encrypted line. Kate guided the driver through narrow service roads and abandoned loading bays, avoiding the main arteries where the Huang scouts would be perched. The harbor was a graveyard of rusting shipping containers and salt-crusted cranes. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and the North Atlantic. Following Kate's lead, they moved on foot through a narrow concrete corridor that ran behind the primary warehouses. Through a gap in the corrugated metal, Kate saw the trap. Chen Wei stood with a dozen armed men, their silhouettes illuminated by the flickering orange of a street lamp. They were focused on the main gate, waiting for the car that would never arrive. Siwoo's elite guards melted into the shadows, flanking the warehouse. Kate felt a cold dread. She was witnessing the mechanics of a localized war. In this district, violent crime rates were 400% higher than the city average, but those stats didn't capture the terrifying silence before a hit. Run when the shooting starts, Siwoo whispered to her. Suddenly, headlights swept across the warehouse. The decoy vehicles arrived. Chen Wei raised a hand and a deafening roar of gunfire erupted, shredding the decoy cars. Chen Wei. Siwoo's voice boomed from behind the traders. On your knees. The ambushers froze. The psychological shock of being outflanked was total. Some dropped their weapons immediately, realizing they were surrounded by Siwoo's hidden marksmen. Chen Wei, however, was a man who knew his fate was sealed. He lunged for a sidearm. Siwoo fired twice. Professional. Precise. Chen Wei collapsed, his life draining into the cold concrete. Kate didn't run. She stood in the shadows, her hand over her mouth, her phone's recorder still spinning. She had the story. But she also had blood on her shoes. Siwoo approached her, holstering his weapon. I told you to run. I don't run from the truth, Kate whispered, though her knees felt like water. The truth is expensive, Kate. Tonight it cost Chin his life. Tomorrow, it might cost yours if you aren't careful. They didn't return to her neighborhood. The sedan climbed the hills to a fortified luxury high-rise, a glass tower where the elite lived in intentional ignorance of the violence below. Siwoo led her into a penthouse that looked like a gallery, cold, expensive, and perfectly curated. He poured 2 glasses of aged whiskey. Drink. The shock is setting in. Kate took a sip, the liquid burning like a cauterizing iron. You killed him without a second thought. In my world, loyalty is the only currency. Chen tried to devalue it, Siwoo said, standing by a window that overlooked the glowing veins of the city. You saved my life tonight, Kate. But in doing so, you've marked yourself. The Huangs know a woman tipped me off. If you go back to that diner, you'll be dead or worse within the hour. The reality hit her harder than the whiskey. Her small apartment, her grandmother's old photos, her modest dreams, they were all targets now. So I'm a prisoner? She asked, her voice cracking. You are a guest with a very high security clearance, Siwoo corrected. But I'm also making you an offer. I don't need another soldier. I have plenty of men who can pull a trigger. I need an eye. I need someone who understands the city's patterns, who can read the streets, and who can see a betrayal before it happens. He stepped closer, his presence a heavy weight in the room. Work for me as an analyst. I will pay you 10 times your annual salary, protect your family, and give you the kind of information a journalist would kill for. And if I say no? Siwoo's expression didn't change, but his eyes turned to flint. Then I cannot guarantee your safety. And I don't like to leave loose ends. Kate looked out at the city. She thought about the statistics she'd compiled on the Huang organization's brutality. She thought about her family. The choices offered in this world were rarely choices at all. They were simply different ways to survive. My family, Kate said, her voice regaining its strength. I want them moved to a safe house. No threats, no leverage. Just safety. Done, Siwoo replied. And I want access. If I'm an analyst, I need to see the whole board. Not just what you want me to see. Siwoo smiled. It was the first time she had seen a flash of genuine warmth, though it was a dangerous kind of heat. You negotiate like a shark, Kate. I like that. He handed her a tablet. Your first task. We recovered Chen's encrypted files. Find out who else he was talking to. Find out where the Huangs are hiding their next shipment. Kate took the tablet. Her fingers, usually reserved for typing up community newsletters and forgotten exposes, now tapped on the keys of a criminal empire's intelligence. She felt the weight of her old life falling away. She was no longer Kate Rivers, the struggling journalist. She was part of the machinery. Get some sleep, Siwoo said, moving toward the door. Your briefing is at 8 a.m. As the door closed, Kate sat on the edge of the silk-covered bed. She looked at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. She had become the investigative eye for a man who ruled the dark, and as she looked out at the city lights, she realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the shadows. She was the one watching them. The transition from Kate Rivers, investigative journalist, to Kate Rivers, criminal analyst, began with the cold, sterile luxury of a safe house. When she woke, the disorientation was brief, crushed by the weight of her new reality. She was no longer a hunter of the truth, she was a guest, or perhaps a prisoner, of the very man she had sought to expose. Park Siwoo had anticipated her arrival with a precision that chilled her. The closet held designer clothes in her exact size, suggesting that her recruitment had been an inevitability in his mind from the moment she returned his keys. At 8 o'clock, the initiation began. David Chin, a man whose professional demeanor masked the lethality of the organization he served, delivered the tools of her new trade, an encrypted tablet and a lockbox of effects, belonging to Chen Wei, the traitor she had helped uncover. Mr. Park requests a preliminary analysis by the end of day, David stated. It wasn't a request, it was an ultimatum. Kate dove into the data. Her journalist mind, trained to find the thread in a haystack of corruption, thrived on the digital treasure trove. She mapped 18 months of gradual decay. Chen Wei's betrayal hadn't been an explosion, it was a slow leak. He had traded small secrets for local influence, escalating until he was a ghost operator within Siwoo's own walls, feeding the rival Huang family the structural blueprints of Siwoo's empire. The physical evidence in the lockbox was more damning. A ledger in Chen's hand and a burner phone revealed the true scope of the rot. Chen hadn't been a lone wolf. Kate identified 4 other names, strategic placements in security and logistics, that acted as the Huang family's shears, ready to clip Siwoo's wings. When Siwoo returned at 3 p.m., the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted. He reviewed her findings with a terrifying stillness. You're certain? He asked, looking at the names of men who had served him for a decade. The patterns are irrefutable, Kate said. The access logs matched the leaks perfectly. The trial moved from the digital to the visceral. Siwoo ordered the men brought to the penthouse. Kate's protest that she was an analyst, not an interrogator, fell on deaf ears. Siwoo wanted her to witness the justice her data had facilitated. 4 men were forced to their knees in the living room. Kate stood to the side, her tablet feeling like a death warrant. As she presented the evidence, her professional instincts took over. She spoke with the clarity of a lead prosecutor, laying out the financial transfers and the compromised operations. The defiance in the men's eyes drained away, replaced by the hollow stare of the condemned. One man, Park Jin-ho, broke the silence. The Huang family offered freedom, he spat. You own us, Siwoo. Loyalty is the only currency that matters here, Siwoo replied, drawing a suppressed handgun. The sound was a mere cough and Park Jin-ho was gone. The remaining 3 collapsed into pleas for mercy. Siwoo turned to Kate, his eyes boring into hers. What would you do with them? This was the true test. Siwoo was measuring her stomach for the darkness. Kate looked at the terrified men and saw the humanity beneath the betrayal. Give them a chance, she whispered. Let them prove their loyalty through service. But watch them. Always. Siwoo nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face. He demoted the men to the lowest rungs of his hierarchy, a life of constant surveillance and indentured atonement. As the body was removed and the room cleaned with haunting efficiency, Siwoo poured 2 whiskeys. "Welcome to the darkness, Miss Rivers," he said. "You've participated in your first execution and your first act of mercy. You've lost your innocence, but you've gained understanding." Kate drank, the burn of the alcohol matching the searing realization that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. 6 weeks later, Kate Rivers no longer existed. In her place was an operative who moved through the digital shadows of the criminal underworld with the same ferocity she once used to chase a front-page headline. She had restructured Siwoo's communication protocols and built a predictive model for law enforcement interference. She was the songbird in a gilded cage. Her family was safe, living in a luxury apartment under the guise of Kate's high-paying security consulting job. Her mother was proud, her grandmother was suspicious. Kate was neither. She was simply a cog in a more powerful machine. Her relationship with Siwoo had become a complex dance of intellectual respect and mutual resentment. He was her mentor, her jailer, and the only person who truly knew what she was. The routine was shattered on the 43rd day. Siwoo arrived with news of a Huang family retaliation. They weren't targeting Siwoo's ships or warehouses. They were targeting Kate's old neighborhood. "It's bait," Siwoo explained. "If I send a full strike team, the streets become a slaughterhouse of civilians. I need a surgical solution. You know those streets better than any satellite map." For 3 hours, Kate became a general. She mapped the alleys she had played in as a child, the basements of her friends' houses, and the rooftops of local businesses. She designed a funnel system, using her intimate knowledge of the terrain to trap the Huang forces in dead zones far from residential blocks. "I want to be there," Kate insisted. Siwoo eventually relented, placing her in a reinforced command van. From the screens, Kate watched her childhood home through infrared lenses. She directed Siwoo's men like chess pieces. When the Huang strike team entered the main thoroughfare, they found not a defenseless neighborhood, but a perfectly calibrated trap. The threat was neutralized in minutes. No civilians were harmed. The drive back was silent until Siwoo spoke. "You saved dozens of lives tonight, Kate. But you must realize, you were protecting my interests. The two are now inseparable." Back at the penthouse, Siwoo delivered the final blow to her past. "Your old apartment was firebombed 3 nights ago. If you hadn't been here, you would be ash." He handed her a new key, this one for a permanent, high-security suite in the building. "You're no longer a guest. You are my strategic advisor. You are the ghost's right hand." Kate looked at the key, then at her reflection in the glass. The woman who wanted to change the system was gone. The woman who now ran the system stood in her place. 3 months later, the transformation was absolute. In the boardroom of Obsidian, the front company for Siwoo's operations, Kate, now known exclusively by her code name, Songbird, sat at the head of the table. Siwoo's inner circle, men who once viewed her as a liability, now waited for her word before moving on southern territories. "The Lee family is a business merger. The Choi Syndicate is a tactical acquisition," Kate stated, her voice devoid of the tremor it once held. She mapped power structures with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. After the meeting, Siwoo presented her with a tablet. It contained a report she had been writing in secret, a scathing exposé on Port Authority corruption. "I know you've been writing this," Siwoo said, "and I'm going to help you publish it." Kate was stunned. "Why?" "Because these are systems I don't control. Exposing them destabilizes my rivals and keeps the police occupied with legitimate targets. You get to remain a journalist and I get to clear the field. It's the ultimate partnership." The realization was a bitter pill. She was still exposing the truth, but only when the truth served the ghost. She was using her virtue as a weapon for a criminal empire. "There is no clear line between corruption and justice, Kate," Siwoo said, standing beside her. "There is only power. You are no longer reporting on the narrative. You are shaping it." Kate looked out at the city. The lights no longer represented a community to be saved, they were a grid to be managed. She had traded her apron for power, her byline for a pseudonym, and her innocence for influence. Her phone buzzed with a message from Siwoo, "Meeting in 1 hour. We have a situation in the Western Territories." Kate checked her reflection. She looked every bit the high-level consultant her family believed she was. She silenced the small, dying voice in her head that asked if the cost was too high. She was Songbird. She was the ghost strategist. And in a world of power and shadows, she had finally found where she belonged. The transition from the waitress at Rosie's diner to the most powerful woman in the city's underground was complete. Kate Rivers had died so that Songbird could fly.